Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Glad to be here for this one.
So, I want to start by having you, the listener, just imagine something really simple. Imagine you flip a coin.
Okay, classic example.
Right. You call heads, the coin lands on heads. And the question is, was that chance? Like a lucky break? Or was the exact trajectory of that coin mathematically guaranteed the very millisecond it left your thumb?
Oh, that is the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you knew the weight of the metal and the exact force of your thumb, the air resistance in the room, the distance to the floor, if you knew all that stuff, would the result still be a mystery? Or was it entirely determined before it even reached its peak in the air?
It really messes with your head when you think about it that way.
Mm-hmm. It does. And today we are taking a deep dive into Book 5 of Boethius's The Consolation of Philosophy. And, well, we are basically going to tear into the fabric of reality itself to figure out if you are actually making choices in your life or, if your entire life is just a sequence of dominoes falling exactly as they were pushed.
And if you lean toward the math side of that coin flip, like the side that says everything is guaranteed by precedent causes, you are stepping right into the intellectual nightmare of a man who is literally sitting in a dungeon.
Yeah, 1,500 years ago.
Exactly. Sitting in a dungeon 1,500 years ago, waiting for the executioner. And he is absolutely terrified that his entire life was just a cosmic, cruel accident.
We really need to ground this deep dive in the reality of the author because it's intense.
It is. I mean, Boethius was a high-ranking official, a brilliantly educated scholar in 6th century Rome, and he's living through basically the collapse of the ancient world.
But he had it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wealth, status, a family.
He had everything. A beautiful family, massive political power. And then, out of nowhere, he was falsely accused of treason by this extremely paranoid king.
Just a total rug pull.
Utterly.
Yeah.
Stripped of his property, separated from his kids, and thrown into a cell in Pavia.
And we really need to clarify, we aren't talking about like a modern climate-controlled prison facility here.
Oh, no, not at all.
This is a dark hole in the ground where he knows exactly how he is going to die. And the historical accounts of his execution, they are really gruesome.
Yeah, they are hard to even read about.
They say a cord was tightened around his forehead until his eyes literally bulged out, and then he was beaten to death with a club.
It's horrific.
So when you open this text,
Yeah.
you can't read it as just some fun academic thought experiment.
Yeah.
This is a man whose world has violently, unfairly collapsed around him.
He is staring directly into the abyss.
Right, desperately trying to figure out if his immense suffering actually has any meaning, or if the universe is just this, chaotic meat grinder.
Which is the perfect framework to keep in mind today. Because, well, when your life falls apart, you are forced to ask those big questions. Is there an order to this? Or is it all just random chance?
And he explores this through a really interesting literary device.
He does. He personifies his own highest reasoning as this majestic, glowing woman named Philosophy, who comes to visit him in his prison cell.
And he just asks her point blank, right? Like, does chance actually exist? Is there any such thing as a random event?
And her answer is incredibly blunt. She just flat out rejects it.
Just a hard no on chance.
Hard no. But we need to be careful here because she rejects it based on a very specific definition of chance.
Okay, unpack that for me. How does she define it?
So she starts by defining chance the way most people casually think about it, like an event that happens without any cause whatsoever.
Like it just pops into existence.
Exactly. She pulls from ancient physics, specifically Aristotle, invoking this old principle, ex nihilo nihil, which means nothing comes from nothing.
Right, I've heard that.
Yeah, so if an event truly had zero cause, it would be springing out of absolute nothingness into existence. And Boethius, like pretty much most ancient thinkers, believed that was just a logical impossibility.
So if chance means a completely uncaused, totally random movement,
then philosophy says the word is, quote, altogether without meaning.
Okay, I have to stop you there, because my immediate reaction to that is the exact same pushback Boethius gives her in the text.
Let's hear it.
Well, I look at my life, and it is full of things I didn't plan. What about coincidences?
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say I travel to a foreign city.
Yeah.
Say, Rome. I am walking down a street, and it suddenly starts pouring rain, so I duck into a random coffee shop to stay dry.
Makes sense.
I look up, and sitting right there at the counter is my best friend from elementary school, who I haven't seen in 20 years.
Wow, okay.
Right. To me, that is pure chance. I didn't cause it. They didn't cause it. It's an accident.
It definitely feels like an accident, but it only feels that way because of your vantage point.
My vantage point.
Yeah. Philosophy forces Boethius to look at the mechanics of what actually just happened. And she uses a more ancient example to explain it. The story of the farmer's gold.
Oh, right. The guy digging in the dirt.
Yeah. Imagine a farmer tilling his field. He is digging deeply to plant his crops. And suddenly, his shovel hits a heavy, buried pot of gold.
Which to the farmer is a miracle. Pure chance.
Exactly. But philosophy points out that this event, finding the gold, didn't come from nothing. It had very real, very specific causes.
Okay, I think I see where this is going. The farmer had an intention, right? Digging for crops.
Right. He was executing a planned action. And decades earlier, someone else had a specific intention. They were terrified of being robbed, so they took their gold and buried it in that exact spot in the field.
Okay, so the person hiding the gold didn't intend for the farmer to find it.
Nope.
And the farmer obviously didn't intend to find the gold either. He just wanted to plant some wheat.
Right. But the event, the shovel literally hitting the metal, is the inevitable mathematical result of those two intentional causal chains intersecting.
Okay, so applying that to my trip to Rome, it's the exact same thing.
Walk me through it.
Well, I had a causal chain. I booked a ticket. It rained. I saw shelter.
Yep.
And my childhood friend had their own causal chain. They were on a business trip. They wanted an espresso. They walked into that specific shop.
Exactly.
The intersection was completely unexpected by me, but the paths themselves were driven by strict causes. So what we call chance
It's just our flawed word for the unexpected intersection of two completely intentional chains of events.
That is wild.
It is. And Boethius takes this a massive step further because those two chains don't just intersect blindly in a vacuum.
What do you mean?
Philosophy argues that all these individual causal chains flow from a much higher, grander order, which she calls providence.
Providence.
Yes, she's saying everything is disposed in its due time and place by a force that guides the entire system.
Which actually brings up one of the most vivid metaphors in the text. I love this part.
A river metaphor.
Yes. In the poems that bridge these chapters, Boethius writes about the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers.
It's beautiful imagery.
It really is. He says, if you stand at the point where these two massive raging rivers converge, it looks like absolute chaos. Ships, uprooted trees, floating debris, it all just violently crashes together.
Pure chaos.
Right. If you are just watching the surface of the water, it looks like the random, quote, drift of hazard is determining where a log smashes into a boat.
It looks like pure chance, but what is actually happening underneath?
The riverbed.
Exactly. Beneath the chaotic surface, the shelving of the channel, the strict shape of the riverbed, and the immense gravitational physics of the flowing water are dictating every single movement.
Wow.
The course of every piece of floating debris is mathematically determined by the water's force. The poem actually says that even where hazard seems completely unrestrained, chance herself is, quote, reined and bitted, and the curb of law doth know.
Translating this into modern life is honestly kind of a double-edged sword. Well, on one hand, we live in a society that is just saturated with high anxiety. We constantly feel like we are at the mercy of chaotic, random events.
Oh, totally. Economic crashes, a sudden illness, getting laid off out of nowhere.
Exactly. And Boethius is kind of offering a cure for that modern dread. He's suggesting that when your life feels like it's being tossed around by that drift of hazard, you are actually held within a broader, unbreakable structure.
There is a riverbed.
Yes. Your suffering isn't just a random glitch in the matrix.
Which is a profoundly comforting thought for a man sitting there facing an imminent execution.
But on the other hand, it creates a massive new problem.
The free will problem.
Right. Because if everything is a river, and the shape of the riverbed and the gravity of the water are controlling every single piece of debris.
Am I just a log floating in the water?
Exactly. If every intersection of my life is just a necessary collision of prior causes, where does that leave my freedom? Do I actually have free will, or am I just, acting out of script?
And that, right there, is the entire burden of Chapter 2. Boethius essentially demands to know the architecture of choice.
Right. He's like, give it to me straight.
He says, if everything is bound by this chain of order, is there any room for human agency? And philosophy answers unequivocally, yes.
Really? How?
In fact, she argues that rationality itself actually requires free will. You cannot be a rational creature without it.
Okay. You're going to have to walk me through that logic.
Yeah.
Why does having a brain mean I have to be free?
Think about what reason actually is. Reason is the faculty of judgment. If you are rational, you have the ability to look at the world and discriminate between options.
Okay, like I judge something as beneficial and I seek it out.
Right, and you judge something as harmful and you shun it.
Makes sense.
But if you couldn't actually make a choice based on that judgment, your reason would be completely pointless.
Oh, I see.
You would be like a mirror able to reflect the world, but entirely powerless to interact with it. So a being endowed with reason must naturally possess the power of free choice.
Okay, so we have free will, but she doesn't stop there. And this is where the text introduces a concept that I think is a massive obstacle for modern readers.
It's the spectrum of freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
She says we have freedom, but that freedom exists on a spectrum. It's not equal for everyone.
Right. She claims that higher divine essences are perfectly free, but human beings are less free because we are wrapped in physical bodies.
And she goes even further than that. She states that when human beings are, quote, given over to vices, they fall into utter slavery.
That is a very direct challenge to the modern Western concept of freedom.
It totally is. Let me push back on Boethius here, because today we define freedom as the absolute absence of restriction.
Meaning nobody tells me what to do?
Exactly. Freedom means I get to do whatever I want whenever I want. If I freely choose to drink half a bottle of whiskey every single night, or, if I choose to doom scroll on social media for 5 hours a day instead of pursuing my actual goals, didn't I make that choice?
You exercise your will, sure.
Right. I exercised my free will to do the thing I desired. How on earth does doing what I want make me a slave?
And that is the essential paradox of modern freedom. We confuse the capacity to choose with the ultimate goal of choice.
What do you mean by the goal of choice?
Boethius is operating on the classical idea that freedom is the capacity to pursue the actual good, to pursue truth and human flourishing.
Okay.
When you choose a destructive vice, you might feel the fleeting sensation of choice in the moment, but you have to look at the mechanical result of that choice. The text argues that when we give in to vices, we lower our gaze from the light of highest truth down to a lower world where darkness reigns.
And what happens to our agency in that darkness?
Ignorance blinds our vision. We become disturbed by what Boethius calls baneful affections.
Baneful affections. That is such a great phrase.
It's a brilliant ancient term for destructive emotions, compulsions, and addictions. By repeatedly yielding to those compulsions, you wire your brain to crave them.
You literally build your own cage.
Exactly. As philosophy puts it, human beings are often led captive by reason of our very liberty.
Led captive by reason of our very liberty. That honestly gives me chills. Because if we look at a practical application for you listening right now, think about the habits governing your days.
Where are your automatic habits actually reducing your freedom?
Right. When you are in the grip of a digital addiction, your rational mind knows what is good for you. You know you should put the phone down, go to sleep, or talk to your family.
But you don't.
But your bodily impulse, your baneful affection, drags you down. You used your initial freedom to form the habit, but now that habit is your master.
You are no longer making a free choice. You are just obeying a compulsion.
That is so true.
Boethius uses a gorgeous poetic image to drive this home in the song about the true sun. He references Homer, who praised the physical sun for its glorious life-giving light.
The actual sun in the sky.
Right. But Boethius notes a critical limitation of the physical sun. No matter how bright it is, its rays cannot pierce the solid rind of the earth.
Okay, so it can't light up the hollows of the ocean or the center of the planet.
Right. It's powerful, but it's bound by physical obstacles.
Yes.
But then he contrasts it with the true sun, which is his metaphor for providence or God. The true sun is not confined by the earth's crest or the blackest canopy of night.
It sees everything.
Its all-seeing eye is baffled by nothing. It sees everything that is, has been, and shall be in one single piercing glance.
So the implication is that true freedom is keeping your mind aligned with that true sun.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you look down into the dirt of your own compulsions, the more enslaved you become.
That's exactly it.
But wait. This introduces the ultimate crap of the book, the central agony of the entire text.
Oh, here we go.
We just established that to be rational, I must have free will.
Right.
But you just said that this true sun, this divine providence, sees absolutely everything that is, has been, and shall be.
Yes. God knows the future perfectly.
Yes. Chapter 3 begins with Boethius admitting he is completely crushed by this. It's an impossible problem.
It's the collision of foreknowledge and free will. And honestly, you don't even have to be religious to feel the terror of this.
Not at all. If God, or let's say a hypothetically perfect predictive supercomputer, completely foresees my actions with zero uncertainty, doesn't that mean my actions are entirely predetermined?
Let's map that out.
Okay, if God knows on Tuesday that I am going to eat an apple on Friday,
Right.
can I choose on Friday to eat a banana instead?
Well, if you can choose the banana, then God's foreknowledge was wrong. He made a mistake.
Exactly. And if I must eat the apple to make God's knowledge true, then I have no choice at all. My script was already written on Tuesday.
Boethius lays out this argument with devastating precision. He absolutely refuses to take the easy theological ways out.
I respect that about him.
He really doesn't pull his punches. He says, look, if from eternity God foreknows not only our actions, but our private designs and purposes, there can be no freedom of the will.
Because if we could turn our decisions aside.
Right, if we could turn our decisions aside to some other end than what was foreseen, then God doesn't actually have foreknowledge. God just has, quote, uncertain conjecture.
God is just guessing.
Exactly. And Boethius says, thinking that of the divine mind is blasphemy. God doesn't guess. God knows with absolute certainty.
So if God knows with absolute certainty, the future is locked.
It's tight.
And if the future is locked, Boethius unleashes what I call the domino effect of determinism.
Oh, this part is brutal.
It really is. He dismantles the entire human experience to show why a universe without free will is an absolute nightmare. And we should really spend some time on this because he knocks down 4 massive dominoes here.
And each one is more terrifying than the last.
What's the first domino?
The first domino to fall is justice. If there is no free and voluntary motion of the will, then the entire concept of rewards and punishments becomes a flagrant injustice.
Right. I mean, why punish a murderer if he was entirely determined to commit the crime by a fixed chain of events set in motion before he was even born?
You are literally punishing a machine for operating the way it was programmed.
And conversely, why reward a hero if she couldn't help but be brave? The Medal of Honor becomes completely hollow. Our entire justice system is built on the assumption that you could have chosen to do otherwise.
Which tips over the second domino, which is morality itself.
Okay, how does that fall?
Well, virtue and vice become meaningless noises we make with our mouths. If men are determined not by their own volition, but by the unbreakable necessity of what must surely be, then good and bad desert are just confounded together.
Meaning nothing you do actually makes you a good or a bad person.
Exactly. You're just a puppet reading a script written by the universe.
Man. And the third domino is the one that causes Boethius the most intense religious panic.
Oh, yeah. This is the big one.
He says that if the whole course of events is deduced from providence and nothing is free, it means that our vices, our cruelties, our wars, our betrayals, the fact that he was falsely accused and is about to be clubbed to death, must be referred back to the author of all good.
Right. God becomes the author of human wickedness.
Which is just awful.
And Boethius says, this is a thought, quote, than which none more abominable can possibly be conceived. You are taking the supreme goodness of the universe and making it responsible for the darkest evils of humanity.
And the final domino, the one that breaks the human spirit completely, is that prayer and hope become entirely useless.
Yeah, that's the final blow.
If everything is an unalterable chain of causation, what is the point of hoping for a better tomorrow? What is the point of praying for mercy or strength? You are asking to change the unchangeable.
Boethius says this severs the one means of intercourse between God and humanity.
The communion is broken.
Yes. The human race is left dissevered from its source, just falling to ruin. You can actually feel the sheer existential panic in his argument.
You really can. He is trapped in this dungeon, and now he feels trapped in a deterministic universe where his cries for help are mathematically meaningless.
It's suffocating.
Now, I know some people try to solve this with a logical workaround, and Boethius anticipates it.
What's the workaround?
The argument goes like, okay, God foreseeing it doesn't cause it to happen. It's going to happen anyway, and God just happens to know it.
Yes.
How does Boethius handle that? Because to me, that sounds like a fairly decent escape hatch.
He cuts right through it with the sitting man analogy.
His sitting man.
Yeah. He imagines someone trying to debate which is the cause and which is the effect. Is the necessity that God foresees it, so it must happen? Or is the necessity that because it's going to happen, God must foresee it?
Okay, let me make sure I grasp this. If I am sitting in this chair right now, and you hold the opinion that I am sitting, your opinion is necessarily true. You aren't wrong.
Exactly.
And conversely, if your opinion that I am sitting is true, it is necessarily because I am actually sitting.
Right. There is a necessity on both sides. The fact that you are sitting causes my opinion to be true. Now, my true opinion doesn't physically force you into the chair.
Okay, so me sitting causes the truth of your thought.
Yes. However, and this is Boethius's killing blow, it doesn't matter which side causes which.
It doesn't.
No. In both cases, there is an inescapable necessity. Even if the foreknowledge doesn't actively cause the future event, the fact that the future event is flawlessly known beforehand means the event is stamped with necessity.
It is inevitably locked in.
Exactly. If it can be perfectly known, it cannot be changed. And that absolute certainty is sufficient to destroy free will.
You know, this dread translates perfectly into our modern lives.
How so?
We might not sit around agonizing over divine foreknowledge, but we interact with this exact same anxiety through predictive technology.
Oh, algorithms.
Exactly. We are surrounded by algorithms designed to perfectly predict our behavior. Think about the last time you were scrolling through a social media feed or shopping online.
If an algorithm knows what video you're going to click on before you even realize you want to watch it, are you actually making a free choice?
Right. Or is your behavior just a predictable output based on a massive data set of your past actions?
It's a scary thought.
When you look at the clock and realize you've been scrolling for 2 hours past your bedtime, it feels like you made a series of poor choices. But mathematically, the system predicted you would do that based on millions of data points of human psychology.
It served you the exact sequence of content to keep your eyes locked.
You were highly determined to do it. Boethius felt this exact existential dread 15 centuries ago. If a higher intelligence knows my output before I execute it, am I just a biological machine?
And the intellectual torment of this realization is captured beautifully in the third song, the poem of Truth's Paradoxes.
What happens in that poem?
Well, Boethius asks us why there is such a strange discordance breaking the harmony of the universe. Why do two truths, the truth that God knows everything and the truth that man is free, seem to be in lasting warfare?
Because they both seem undeniably true.
Right. We strive to reconcile them in vain. He wonders if the discord is not actually in the truth itself, since truth by nature must be consistent.
Right, the truth can't fight itself.
Exactly. He says the discord must be in us.
He writes that we are held in fleshly wrappings, and our blinded minds just can't discern the subtle chain that binds everything together.
We are seeing a paradox where there might actually be a perfect unity, but our brains just aren't equipped to see it.
And then he pivots to these haunting questions about the human drive for knowledge, which I love.
Oh, the paradox of learning.
Yeah. He says, why does the mind burn to find truth hidden portals? If the mind already knows what it seeks, why toil to seek it?
But if it doesn't know, what is it blindly groping for?
Right. How can you pursue an unknown end? If you stumble upon a profound truth you never knew, how would you even recognize it as truth?
It's the ultimate paradox. And his answer points back to a concept very similar to Plato's idea of memory.
Okay. Plato's memory concept, remind me.
He suggests that the inmost soul once knew each part and knew the whole of truth. But now, dimmed by those fleshly vapors, we are in a state of amnesia.
Oh.
We haven't forgotten everything, but we have lost the specific parts, while somehow still holding on to a vague sense of the whole.
He says the person yearning for truth is neither sound of sight nor completely blind. They hold on to what is left, groping in the uncertain light, trying to win back the full vision.
And that profound state of groping in the dark is the perfect setup for Chapter 4.
Because Boethius is completely trapped by his own logic here.
Oh, he has laid out the trap of determinism flawlessly. The walls are closing in on him, and philosophy steps back in and essentially says, great thinkers like Cicero wrestled with this exact problem.
So he's not the first.
Not at all. You have pondered it endlessly. But the reason no one has found a solution is because you all share a fundamental flaw in how you are looking at the problem of knowledge.
Okay, she is about to initiate one of the most massive paradigm shifts in ancient philosophy. What is the counter-argument she introduces to save free will?
She points out a huge epistemological blind spot. She tells Boethius, you are assuming that knowledge is grasped purely according to the nature and efficacy of the thing being known.
Okay, wait.
But that is completely backward.
Stop. I need to wrap my head around that. Are you saying that if I look at a coffee mug on my desk, my knowledge of that mug isn't determined by the mug itself?
Exactly. That's exactly what she's saying.
But the mug is the mug.
Yes. But the core wisdom she delivers is this. All that is known is grasped not conformably to its own efficacy, but rather conformably to the faculty of the knower.
the faculty of the knower.
Right. Knowledge depends not on the inherent nature of the object, but entirely on the capacity of the subject doing the knowing.
Okay, so my knowledge of the coffee mug is determined by my specific human ability to perceive.
Correct.
If I were like a bat using echolocation, my knowledge of the mug would be entirely different. Not because the mug changed, but because my faculty of knowing changed.
You've got it perfectly. To prove this point, philosophy walks Boethius through a fascinating biological and philosophical ladder, a hierarchy of perception.
Okay, let's climb the ladder.
Let's look at the 4 rungs of this ladder to see how different faculties perceive the exact same reality in wildly different ways. The lowest rung is sense.
Sense. Just basic feeling. Who operates solely on this level?
Creatures void of motive power. Think of a barnacle or an oyster or a shellfish clinging to a rock in the ocean.
Right. So if I'm an oyster, I have no eyes, no ears, no brain to process complex thought. I only know the world through immediate physical touch.
Exactly.
If the water gets cold, I feel cold. If a rock scrapes my shell, I feel pressure. I have zero concept of what is happening 5 feet away from me.
Because you can't.
Right. I can only know matter by its immediate physical presence. That is the limit of the faculty of sense.
Now step up to the second rung. Imagination.
Imagination.
This belongs to beasts endowed with movement, who have the capacity to seek and shun. A dog, for instance.
Okay, a dog isn't just a barnacle. A dog can feel the cold water, yes, but it can also see a bone across the yard.
Right. It can form a mental image, a representation of a physical object, even when it isn't currently touching it.
A dog can remember where it buried the bone yesterday. It has sense, but it is added imagination.
But the dog is still entirely tethered to specific material things. It imagines that specific bone.
It doesn't imagine the concept of a bone.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third rung, thought or reason. And this, philosophy argues, pertains only to the human race.
This is where we transcend specific physical objects. Thought can grasp universal concepts.
Yes.
The text gives the example of defining man as a 2-legged animal endowed with reason.
Or think about geometry. If I ask you to think of a triangle, you don't have to picture one specific wooden triangle sitting on a desk.
Right. I just think of the shape.
You can grasp the universal concept of triangularity, a shape with 3 straight sides whose internal angles add up to 180 degrees.
You extract the universal rule from the specific instances.
Right. A dog cannot do that. A dog can only imagine a specific physical pointy thing it once chewed on. Human thought extracts the universal type contained within the individual.
And then we reach the 4th and final rung, the one that causes all the trouble. Intelligence.
Yes. This is the divine perspective.
How is it different from thought?
Intelligence overpasses even the universal concepts of human thought. It beholds absolute form itself by the pure force of the mind's vision.
So it doesn't need to define things step by step.
Not at all. It doesn't extract rules. It surveys all things. The universal of thought, the figure of imagination, and the material of sense in a single, immediate flash of intuition.
Philosophy uses a really great analogy to cement this idea of different faculties looking at the exact same object. It's the analogy of roundness.
Let's hear it.
Let's use a large physical sphere, like a globe. If you rely solely on the faculty of touch, like a creature of pure sense, like our oyster, you have to grasp the roundness of the globe piecemeal.
Right.
You run your hands over the surface, you feel the curve, you move around the periphery.
Yeah.
It takes time, and at any given moment, you only know the specific part you were touching.
But if you use the faculty of sight, you can stand back and instantly recognize the roundness of the entire globe as a whole by a simultaneous reflection of rays.
So neither the touch nor the sight is wrong about the sphere. The sphere hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't.
But sight is a higher, more comprehensive faculty. It grasps in a fraction of a second what touch takes minutes to trace out.
And here is the crucial rule that governs this entire ladder. The higher faculty of comprehension embraces the lower, but the lower absolutely cannot rise to comprehend the higher.
The lower is just stuck.
Yes. Sense has no power beyond immediate matter. Imagination cannot behold universal ideas. Thought cannot embrace pure, timeless form.
But intelligence, the divine mind, looking down from its higher standpoint, discriminates and comprehends all the lower elements without needing to use their methods.
Exactly. It doesn't need to use human reason to figure things out sequentially, any more than a human needs to use an oyster's sense of touch to know that a ball is round.
This leads philosophy to attack a very popular idea of her time. And frankly, a popular idea in modern psychology, too. In the 4th song, she heavily criticizes the Stoic doctrine that likens the living mind to a blank, written page.
The concept of the tabula rasa, the blank slate.
Right. The idea that all human knowledge comes purely through passive sense experience. You are born as a smooth, unsullied piece of white paper, and external objects just stamp their images onto your consciousness.
Boethius rejects this entirely.
He does not buy it at all.
No. He asks, if the mind is just a passive mirror reflecting outside things, where does our wondrous faculty to perceive and know actually come from? A mirror can't dispose the world into an ordered scheme.
Right, a blank page can't divide things up, recombine them, and sift the false from the true.
He insists the mind has a living power within. Yes, the body, through the senses, stirs the intelligence. Light flashes on the eye. Sound strikes the eardrum. But it is the active, living mind that arouses to response.
The mind makes the message clear and combines those external signs with hidden forms it already possesses. We are not passive receptacles. We are active, forceful knowers.
And this brings us back to the clash of the faculties. Because just as a shellfish cannot comprehend the universal concepts of human reason cannot comprehend the immediate, timeless intuition of divine intelligence.
They speak different languages.
Exactly. Philosophy poses a brilliant hypothetical. What if sense and imagination were to team up and argue with thought?
Like, what if the oyster and the dog formed a union and told the human, your idea of a universal concept is complete nonsense because we can't touch it or imagine it physically?
What would the human say?
The human would look at them and say, you are judging reality by the limits of your own lower faculties. You should trust the stronger, more perfect faculty of judgment.
And philosophy springs the trap on Boethius right there.
Oh, she gets him.
She says, you are doing exactly what the oyster does. You are looking at divine intelligence, which sees the entire scope of time, and you are trying to understand it using the lower, time-bound faculty of human reason.
You are projecting your limitations onto God.
Exactly.
This is beautifully illustrated in the fifth song, The Upward Look. It's a physical metaphor for this clash of faculties. Boethius describes the shapes of all the creatures on earth.
Snakes writhing in the dust, birds dividing the winds, beasts roaming the meadows.
Right. But they all share one physical trait. Their heads are bent low to the ground. Their gaze is fixed on the dirt.
As the poem says, in all the head, low bent, dulls the soul and blunts the senses.
But man alone stands erect. He lifts his forehead to the skies. His upright posture is a physical mandate to despise the baseness of the earth.
It's a call to look higher.
The poem ends with a warning that I think applies so well to this intellectual struggle. If your gaze is fixed on heaven, make sure you lift your soul upward too, lest thine eyes alone look upward, while thy mind cleaves to the earth.
In other words, elevate your thinking. Stop trying to drag the divine mind down into the mud of human, sequential, temporal reasoning.
Which brings us to the climax of the argument in Chapter 6. This is where philosophy explains what it actually looks like when we lift our minds upward to understand how God knows things.
And to do that, we have to completely redefine a word we use all the time, but almost always misunderstand.
We have to redefine eternity.
I am so glad we are digging into this because when most of us hear the word eternity, we just think of a really, really long time.
Right. We imagine a timeline that stretches infinitely into the past and infinitely into the future without ever hitting a wall.
But Boethius says that is absolutely not what eternity is.
Okay, so what is it?
He draws a razor-sharp distinction between being everlasting and being eternal. Everlasting means endless duration in time.
Okay.
But eternity, he writes, is the complete possession of endless life, whole and perfect at a single moment.
Whole and perfect at a single moment. That breaks my brain a little bit.
It takes a minute to sink in. Let's contrast that with how we experience time.
Right.
Think about your life right now. You live in a moving present. You perceive from the past into the future. At this exact second, you do not possess yesterday. It's gone. You can't touch it.
True.
And you do not possess tomorrow. It hasn't happened yet. Even today, you only actually live in one brief, transitory, razor-thin moment that is constantly slipping away.
Okay.
You never possess the whole space of your life all at once.
So even if the physical universe have no beginning and will have no end, even if it is everlasting, it is still trapped in time.
It's exactly.
It is still moving from moment to moment, losing the past and waiting for the future.
Yeah.
It never holds its full life together simultaneously.
The text says the infinite progression of time is actually just a flawed, moving copy of God's moveless, changeless life.
Because the universe can't possess its whole life all at once, it tries to mimic eternity by constantly moving, hurrying along the infinite path of time.
It's like time is a blurry, panning video attempting to capture eternity's perfect still photograph.
Wow, that is a great way to put it.
But God, being truly eternal, is completely outside the condition of time. God includes and possesses the whole fullness of unending life all at once.
Nothing future is absent.
Nothing past has escaped. It is an abiding, stationary present.
So, if we accept this definition of eternity as a stationary perpetual now, it completely shatters Boethius's problem with foreknowledge.
Because, as philosophy points out, if God abides forever in an eternal present, God doesn't actually have foreknowledge.
Right, because the prefix for implies looking ahead into a future that hasn't happened yet. But for God, there is no future.
Precisely. God's knowledge transcends all movement of time. It embraces the entire infinite sweep of the past and the future and contemplates it all as if it were happening right now.
It's not a prevision of things to come, it is a providence.
And Boethius points out that the word providence comes from looking out from a lofty height.
Imagine God standing on a mountaintop.
Yes, looking down at the entire parade of human history, past, present, and future, laid out in a single, simultaneous panorama in the valley below.
Okay, I track with the metaphysics of that, I really do.
Mm.
But I have to admit, I'm still struggling with the practical outcome.
What's the holdup?
Well, if God sees my whole life right now from that mountaintop, how am I free? If he sees me turning left tomorrow, I still have to turn left, don't I?
And this is where philosophy introduces one of the most useful logical distinctions in ancient thought, the two necessities.
Break those down for me.
She says there is a simple necessity and a conditional necessity. Simple necessity is driven by the sheer nature of things. Men are necessarily mortal. The sun necessarily rises in the sky.
Right. It is bound by physical laws. It has to happen by its own nature.
Conditional necessity, however, is based purely on observation. If you know that a man is walking, it is necessary that he is walking.
Because you can't have true knowledge of something that is false.
Right. If you see him walking, he must be walking.
Okay, yes, I'm with you.
But, and this is the hinge of the entire argument,
Yeah.
your knowledge that he is walking does not compel him to walk. The necessity comes from the condition of your knowledge, not from the nature of his action. He is walking voluntarily. Your seeing him doesn't force his legs to move.
Boethius uses a brilliant analogy for this. He talks about a charioteer.
It's the perfect image for Rome.
Imagine we are sitting in the stands at the Colosseum in ancient Rome, watching a chariot race. We see a driver whipping his horses, deciding in a split second to take a sharp left turn to overtake his opponent. We are watching him in our present moment. Now, the fact that we are seeing him turn makes it conditionally necessary that he is turning because it's happening right in front of our eyes. We aren't hallucinating.
Right.
But does our act of watching him force him to turn?
Assuredly not. Your vision adds absolutely no necessity to the things you see before your eyes. You are merely witnessing his free, voluntary choice as it unfolds in the present.
And here's the grand synthesis that saves free will. God watches all of human history, including the choices I will make 10 years from now, exactly the same way we watch the charioteer in our immediate present.
Because to God, your future is happening right now.
Right now.
Our actions are conditionally necessary from the standpoint of God's timeless vision, meaning, because God sees them, they are real and certain.
But considered in their own nature down on the ground.
They are absolutely free and unfettered. God sees you freely choosing. His vision anticipates all that is coming, but it doesn't force it. It just includes your free choices in a single flash of immediate cognizance.
But wait, Boethius asks one final desperate question, and it's the exact one I would ask.
What is it?
He says, okay, if it's in my power to change my purpose, if I decide to do X, but then freely change my mind and do it, why am I changing God's providence?
Oh, that's a clever trap.
Right. Because if I change my mind, doesn't God's knowledge have to adapt and change to keep up with me? And if God changes, he isn't perfect.
It's a really great objection, but philosophy replies, no, the divine knowledge does not alternate to this or that.
It doesn't.
No, it transforms and reduces all your future changes into its own present knowledge. God's single flash of intuition already forestalls and includes all your mutations.
Meaning God sees me deciding, agonizing, changing my mind, and settling on my final action all at the exact same time.
Yes.
It's like God is holding the entire DVD of my life. Every scene, every plot twist, every agonizing choice I make is already burned onto that disc.
That's a great modern way to picture it.
And the fact that the whole movie is already completed on the disc in his hand doesn't mean the characters inside the movie aren't making choices within the narrative. God just holds the whole completed story in an eternal present.
It really is a stunning intellectual achievement.
It really is.
And if we look at comparative insight across other wisdom traditions, we see humanity wrestling with this exact tension between cosmic order and human agency everywhere.
Give me some examples.
Well, you have the Eastern concept of karma, which emphasizes the strict causal effects of our actions across time. You have Stoic determinism, which argued that everything is fated by the logos, and true freedom is just willingly accepting what must happen anyway.
Right.
And today we have modern neurodeterminism. That argues that our choices are just the inevitable output of brain chemistry and environmental conditioning.
We are constantly being told from every angle that we are just cogs in a machine.
But Boethius provides a synthesis that validates both the absolute perfection of cosmic order and the radical reality of human responsibility. He refuses to compromise on either. Exactly. God is perfectly sovereign and all-knowing, and man is perfectly, terrifyingly free.
So we have traveled from a grim prison cell in 6th century Italy, down the causal rivers of chance, up the biological ladder of human perception, all the way into the timeless, stationary present of divine eternity.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. But what is the practical how-to for you, the listener, trying to live a good life today? What is the actual takeaway from all this high-level metaphysics?
What I find most moving about this entire text is how Boethius ends it. He has just scaled the Mount Everest of philosophy.
He really has.
But he doesn't end with a complex mathematical equation or a final logical puzzle. Having solved the great anxiety of his mind, having realized he is not a victim of a random universe, he ends with a direct, urgent moral command.
What does he say?
He writes, "Therefore withstand vice, practice virtue, lift up your souls to right hopes, offer humble prayers to heaven."
He writes, "Great is the necessity of righteousness laid upon you, seeing that all your actions are done before the eyes of a judge who seeth all things."
He is telling himself, as he waits for the executioner, and he is telling us that what we do matters infinitely.
To translate this into your life, you are not a victim of a random chaotic universe. You are not a piece of flotsam drifting meaninglessly down a river of chance.
And you are not a puppet on a predetermined string acting out a script you had no part in writing.
Exactly. You are a rational being, endowed with the immense dignity and burden of free choice. And you are acting on a brightly lit stage in the eternal present of a loving providence.
Your choices resonate in eternity.
They really do. To resist the vices that enslave you, to practice virtue even when it's exhausting, to hope when things are dark, and to pray. They are seen, they are known, and they matter.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over, building on what we've discovered today.
Yeah, let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time talking about how divine eternity is the complete, peaceful possession of life in a single stationary now.
The eternal present.
Right. It makes you wonder. Perhaps our modern obsession with mindfulness, with staying present, with finding flow states where time seems to stand completely still.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Perhaps these aren't just psychological tricks to reduce stress or boost productivity. Perhaps when we truly anchor ourselves in the present moment, escaping the tyranny of regretting the past and fearing the future, we are actually catching a profound, fleeting glimpse into the perspective of eternity itself.
A momentary alignment with the true sun.
Exactly.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.